This episode is brought to you by Tic Tac. Summer tastes like Tic Tac. Tantalize your taste buds this sunny season with citrus adventure and orange. 2 everyday flavors that bring summer in every. Tic Tac Citrus Adventure is a yummy, vibrant medley of lemon, lime, and mandarin. And Tic Tac Orange is the perfect mix of tangy and sweet. Visit us at Tic Tac USA on social to refresh your summer with Tic Tac.
Today on CityCast Boise, wolves were wiped out in Idaho nearly a century ago, then controversially brought back in the 90s. Now they're thriving, and the battle over their future is fiercer than ever. In this sneak peek of the new podcast, Howl, we explore what it means to share the West with wolves and who gets to decide their fate. It's Wednesday, June 4th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. I'm talking with podcaster Heath Drusen and Idaho Capitol Sun reporter Clark Corbin. They have a new podcast called Howl, all about wolves in the Mountain West. Thank you both for being here today.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Heath, I got to hear a sneak peek of your upcoming podcast, and it's a fascinating listen. Where did this project take you, and how did reporting from wolf country shape the way that you told this story?
Well, like with a lot of my projects, I was like, how can I get paid to hike in Yellowstone?
That's always a good place to start.
Right, exactly. You'll hear it in the first episode. Listeners will kind of be dropped right into this, but I actually had a close encounter with a wolf when I was hiking in Yellowstone a few years ago, where I was by myself hiking, and I literally ran into a mama wolf and her pups, like 200 feet in front of me, really close. And we kind of had this little, I'd like to think friendly stare down. And I was always interested in wolves, but that really kind of got me thinking okay, I want to know more about wolves in the West. I want to know more about wolves in Yellowstone. And it just dawned on me. I'm like, hey, wait a second, look at the calendar. Wolves were reintroduced 30 years ago. Oh, wow. This is a big anniversary and arguably the biggest wildlife story in the West, probably the most controversial wildlife program in U.S. government history. We're 30 years in. What are people thinking now? What's happening with that? And I wanted to do it with somebody who could come out in the backcountry with me. So that's when I looked to Clark and was like, hey, do you want to, what do you think of teaming up on a story like this?
Well, and Clark, like Heath mentioned, this is the 30th year anniversary of wolves being reintroduced in the West. Can you paint a picture for us about what happened in 1995 and why it mattered so much?
Yeah, it was fascinating. And I think that's one of the coolest things was being able to get involved deeply in this story with some of the people who were there 30 years ago. And so wolves used to be abundant in the U.S. Rocky Mountains, but the federal government through bounties basically killed them off, almost completely eradicated them from the West by the 1920s and 1930s. And so after wolves were given protection under the Endangered Species Act in 1974, there was this campaign to bring the wolves back. And we connected with some of the original folks, some of the original members of the wolf team, including Carter Niemeyer and Suzanne Aisha Stone, some of the folks who went up to Canada to capture wolves to bring back to Idaho and Yellowstone National Park. The only way to bring wolves back to Idaho and Yellowstone was to do it by hand. And so that's kind of where the written series of Howl starts. We're in the helicopter with Carter, watching the first wolf that ends up getting darted in the wild in Canada and captured. They were then given veterinary exams and vaccinations and screened for disease and loaded into kennels and shipped to Yellowstone. But it was a very tense operation. We talk about how the U.S. wolf team arrived in Canada and the trappers that they were supposed to be working with had grown distrustful of the U.S. government. They hadn't gotten paid yet. And so instead of capturing and caring for wolves to be released in the U.S., they were actually killing wolves at that time. And so there was this whole drama to even get the program off the ground. But yeah, they were darted from tranquilizer guns from helicopters and put in cages and then flown and driven to Yellowstone National Park and to Idaho just over 30 years ago.
It sounds like a really complicated operation. Were there concerns that even when they got the wolves in the West, they wouldn't thrive, or it had been so long they wouldn't really take hold?
Yeah, nobody knew what to expect. I mean, they were essentially just letting wolves out and seeing what they would do. And especially in Idaho, actually. So in Yellowstone, the wolves, they were put in these like 1-acre pens, and they were allowed to sort of get accustomed to their surroundings before they were released for a while. In Idaho, they did what's called a hard release, which is kind of what it sounds like. Basically, they put the crates down on the edge of the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. They opened the door, and the wolves just left. And I mean, yeah, nobody knew if those wolves would, turn around, find a road, get hit by a car. I mean, or if somebody might poach them, or if they just would starve, right? I mean, like there's so many things that could go wrong because once you release those wolves, you can monitor them, but they're on their own to find their own food. So obviously, the people who spearheaded the program thought there was a good chance that the wolves would survive. But what that actually meant, that was unclear. A lot of people sort of in the program were like, you know what? Hopefully they'll establish themselves and we'll get up to a population of a few hundred wolves. And that'll be great. That'll be, from 0 to a few hundred. And yeah, as you'll hear in the podcast, and as a lot of people know in Idaho, that number was far surpassed, and wolves just flourished beyond anybody's wildest dreams.
Yeah, there was really no precedent for any kind of a program like that. There wasn't a blueprint where other states or other countries had really undertaken this. And wolf reintroduction is almost as controversial a topic as you can put forward in the West. Some people are passionately supportive of wolves, say they're a native species, that we need to figure out a way to coexist and live side by side. But on the other side of the coin, the people that actually live near where the wolves were reintroduced, who work there, who have farms and ranchers there, were vehemently opposed to it. And during the course of our reporting, we sat down with families who've lost, they say, 200 head of cattle since wolves were reintroduced 30 years ago. So I cannot sort of overemphasize how controversial a decision this was, how strong the feelings are, and how strong those feelings remain today. But nobody really knew what would happen once they released the wolves. And so it was this grand experiment. And they just kind of sat back and monitored the wolves and went from there.
Well, and Clark, like you mentioned, this is a very polarizing topic to this day in the West. What surprised you most throughout your reporting about the perspectives you heard from different people?
I think it just really reinforced how controversial it was. But we talked to people that were there 30 years ago, and they told us, I'm thinking of like Doug Smith, who headed up the wolf reintroduction program in Yellowstone for almost 30 years. He says that if anything, attitudes have hardened over the last 30 years and that the two sides aren't talking to each other. He said that's not progress. That's not effective. But he does worry that the anti-wolf forces are winning at this point. He's worried about some of the laws in states, particularly like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, that have expanded wolf hunting and wolf trapping opportunities. And so if anything, it's even more controversial than it ever was. The attitudes have hardened. People have dug in, and the two sides really aren't talking to each other and aren't getting along. We encountered some of that in our story, and I think it just re-emphasized the debate as intense today as it was in the 1990s.
And Heath, throughout the podcast, you talked with people and spent time with people who are deeply anti-wolf. What's at the heart of their opposition?
Yeah, the people we talked to, essentially, their bottom line is threatened by wolves. We sat down with some ranchers, and as Jay Smith, one of the ranchers we talked about, I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, but he's like, are you telling me that a wolf is going to go for a fast, smart elk instead of a slow, dumb cow? And I thought that, he put it really well. Like, yeah, like livestock are easy meals. So something that might be, we talked to a trapper, and also he's an alfalfa farmer. And that might not be as obvious, but some farmers are feeling the pinch too, because they say elk, fearful of wolves, are kind of taking refuge in agricultural areas where wolves don't go as much because they're afraid of people. So, elk will go down to some alfalfa farms, especially down in the Magic Valley and kind of on the way to Sun Valley. And they'll trample the fields, they'll eat the alfalfa, and, nobody's in the mind of a wolf, so it's like, or an elk, so like you can't say for certain. But yeah, a lot of people think that the elk are there because they know that they're less likely to be eaten by a wolf. So there's plenty of folks who say that wolves they hurt their business. They make them, change their practices, to protect their cattle, to protect their farms.
Well, and those are some impacts I, maybe wasn't aware about, especially for the farmers and how that actually might be affecting their crops as well. Clark, on the flip side, you also talked with people who are working on peaceful coexistence or using non-lethal management of wolves, wanting to collaborate with ranchers and farmers. How are those efforts going?
Yeah, we talked with somebody right here in Idaho, Suzanne Aisha Stone, who's the co-founder of the Wood River Wolf Project. And I think she has about 15, 20 years of history out in Blaine County, out in central Idaho, which is big time sheep country and wolf country. And so we have a whole episode of Howl that when we talk about some of these conflicts that Heath mentioned, we talk about some of the non-lethal practices that Suzanne and her team have used out in central Idaho. And it's both protecting the wolves and protecting the livestock. And it's almost kind of silly things when she got in and talked to us about it. But one of the tools they use is something called fladry. And what that is, if you can picture almost like a car lot with flags on poles hanging and blowing in the wind every which way, that's kind of the idea, is to surround the livestock or the pen or the grazing area with things like that. Suzanne said that wolves are scared of people and scared of new things and scared of the unfamiliar. And so even though it's harmless to us, that's been documented to deter wolves and keep them away from livestock. But it's not just that. It's they've used air horns. They've had people up with the wolves. They've had lights and other kinds of flags. She talked to Heath and I even about people playing loud music to scare the wolves off. And she said that AC/DC was particularly effective from keeping wolves away. And so I am excited for that episode of Howl and being able to share that.
I'd imagine it's difficult to get AC/DC to play throughout the state all the time. So I imagine that causes some problems.
It's true. Angus Young has a busy touring schedule, so, it's tough.
What I gathered from that is wolves don't like classic rock, flags, or jump scares.
Exactly.
I think you've got it. Yeah.
Hey Boise, it's Lindsay. Let's keep it real. If you've got something great to offer, like a business or an event, you should be advertising with us. People in Boise trust us to tell them what's good, and that could be you. Our listeners care about what's happening, and they love a good local recommendation. So if you want to make sure the best audience in town knows about you, then advertise on CityCast Boise. Learn more by emailing us at ads@citycast.fm. That's ads@citycast.fm.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Heath, what was it like to talk to some of these people like Carter Niemeyer, who were the pioneers and really the advocates for bringing wolves back? Do they think this program has been successful in the past 30 years? Do they feel like there were mistakes that were made or things that they would have done differently? Or are they overall happy with how this process has gone?
I think one of the coolest things about making Howl was that we did get to go through the history of wolf reintroduction with the people who were literally on the ground. And in Carter's case, literally struggling through the snow to put a wolf over his shoulders and bring it back to a helicopter. So yeah, I think listeners will really love that because you're going to be there in the snow with Carter. And he's this legendary trapper and tracker who, as Clark mentioned, like went to Canada and got the wolves. And he's just got crazy stories. I think a lot of the history people might not know about, like the death threats, even gunshots, frostbite, all this crazy stuff that was in the way of this program, and, threatened to derail it. And how's it going? That's why this is not just a history podcast. We do look forward. And as Clark kind of alluded to, there's some people who would say that it's not going as well today as a lot of people might assume. Wolves have thrived. There's no question about that. Their numbers have just skyrocketed beyond anyone's wildest dreams. But a lot of states like Idaho, whose governments are pretty skeptical of wolves, they've greatly increased hunting opportunities. And I'm not going to spoil it too much, but if you listen to the end, you'll hear that some of the wolf numbers, there's some questions about the numbers we assume to be true, and that wolves might be in bigger trouble than we think. And and attitudes, that was a big surprise to me that you would think attitudes have changed a lot and maybe softened. And for some people they have, but there's still a lot of people with pretty hard feelings about wolves, even 30 years on.
Well, I mean, even politically, wolves are in the crosshairs, literally and figuratively, with the Idaho legislature. And so, Clark, how has the Idaho legislature shaped the future of wolf management?
Yeah, for sure. It has become a big political issue. In 2021, the Idaho legislature passed a law that expands hunting and trapping in Idaho. It makes trapping legal year-round on private land. It eliminated the limit on the number of wolf tags that hunters could buy, and it allowed the state of Idaho to enter into contracts with other government agencies, but also third parties to kill wolves. And the state of Idaho, with the legislature leading the way, is seeking to dramatically reduce the number of wolves in the state of Idaho. One of the episodes at the end gets into questions about how many wolves there are in the state of Idaho. But the state's position is that it wants to reduce the overall amount of wolves. And when we talked about one of the problems that Suzanne is running into when she has these non-lethal methods and this research she's gathering, the official position for the state of Idaho and the Idaho Department of Fish and Game is that right now they prefer lethal method of wolf control, even when non-lethal method is available, because the policy is to reduce the number of wolves in the state of Idaho. And so those are some of the roadblocks, and those are some of the ways that it has become political, that really the legislature has been driving the conversation, in particular since that 2021 wolf law was passed. Lindsay?
Well, and Heath, one more thing I want to make sure we hit on is in the podcast, there's a whole episode dedicated to the Nez Perce tribe's involvement. And I didn't know this. I'm guessing a lot of people don't realize how critical they were to wolf reintroduction happening. What did you learn about that part of the story?
Yeah, I didn't know about it either. And I think this part of the story is going to be is one of these like largely untold stories about wolf reintroduction. But the Nez Perce tribe was critical in bringing wolves back because, not surprisingly, Idaho was not excited about wolf reintroduction when it happened. And they're still not excited about it even now. But they actually went as far as boycotting the whole process. So the federal government brought wolves back, but they need a partner on the ground. In this case, it was Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming to monitor the wolves as they spread out over the land. Idaho basically said no, said we're not going to do it. We're just going to boycott the whole process. So our fish and game officers are not allowed to work with the federal government. So that was a really big deal because all of a sudden the federal government had to find another agency. And the Nez Perce stepped forward and were like, well, we'll be the state agency if they won't do it. So we get into that and just how the Nez Perce, this sort of millennia-long relationship that the Nez Perce have had with wolves because they've been in Idaho longer than anyone, and how the loss of wolves affected them, and this sort of rare opportunity to in their minds kind of make amends for a historical wrong. So yeah, it was really cool. We spent some time up on the Nez Perce Reservation in Lapway and talking to some of the people who were there from the early days and out in the backcountry, kind of nurturing this new population. I say nurturing, but they kind of nurtured themselves. But these guys were out monitoring them, trying to figure out how they were doing and what they needed.
And bringing this back home, back to Boise, how close are wolves to our area today? Like, should hikers and campers be, bringing their AC/DC and their flags?
Yes, there have been reports of wolves coming as close as sort of the very top of the foothills above the Boise Front and the Boise National Forest, and then on out through Idaho City and some of that country as you get closer into the Sawtooth and then the Frank Church Wilderness, where wolves were originally reintroduced. And so it's something to be aware of. I think when we're out backpacking and hiking and camping, we want to be aware of wildlife. I happen to carry bear spray a lot of times with me when I'm in bear country, but I also want to say I don't think that wolves pose an overall risk to humans. There really hasn't been any documented examples in modern history in America of wild wolves attacking people. There really just isn't data out there showing that. It's something to be aware of, though. Like when you're in Yellowstone National Park, the rangers always tell you to stay 100 yards away from wolves and grizzlies. And I think that's for the animals' safety and the people's safety.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if you haven't met a wolf before, you'll be new to them and they don't like new things. So that's a good defense right there.
They're pretty afraid of people. Yeah. So like if you see one, feel very lucky, but and keep your distance. But they haven't posed a threat to people in the U.S. At least.
And I want to round this out by asking both of you, if listeners take away one idea from this series, what do you hope sticks with them?
I would say that the wolf issue is complicated. And that it often feelings get super overcharged on both sides, and just how important it is to have a little bit of understanding of folks on all sides of the issue, because that is something that seems to be missing right now. Where people just aren't talking to each other. And I think we've definitely seen examples where people and wolves can coexist and do it very successfully. But it definitely doesn't happen by just sort of yelling at each other and digging in.
I agree with that. But for me, Howl is a story about wolves and it's a story about people. Heath and I were lucky enough that we got to go to some of the last wild places in the lower 48 in search of wolves, but also talking to people who are affected. And this story took us more than a year to write and report. It's almost been a year and a half since we first sat down with Carter and first developed it. And so it's really this epic story of life and death in the West. And to me, it raises questions about, is there room in America in 2025 for wild places and wild creatures? This used to be the wolves' home. Like the Native Americans, the wolves were here long before European settlers arrived, conquering the West, so to speak. And so it's a question about, can we coexist with wild places and wild creatures in our lives in 2025 in America? And how do we do that? And it was just a blast reporting it. It was the hardest thing I've ever worked on. It was super ambitious looking back on all the things that we wanted to do when we talk about a 5-part written series in the Idaho Capital Sun, a 5-part podcast series, a live event that we're partnering with that's going to be taking place June 17th at the Boise State Student Union building for free with some of the leading wolf experts in the country talking about wolf reintroduction. But it's just this epic story, but there's no easy takeaway. It's complicated, and people on both sides have serious effects on their lives as a result of wolves.
I want to thank you both so much for joining me today to break down some of your insights, some of the perspective you gained in this 18-month journey. And we'll link your Howl podcast in our show notes.
Yeah, it's everywhere you get podcasts, as they say.
Thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.
That's all all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with an insider look at Canyon County Pride. You won't want to miss it.